I created my chess.com account on the 19th of December 2021, and since then I've spent over 3,000 hours on the website. I've explored every square inch of this website, so in today's video I'm going to be giving a critical analysis of chess.com as a whole and give it a rating at the end. Before we do start this video though, I want to note that this video does not intend to throw hate onto the website, but give a fair and unbiased review of it. I'll be ranking every feature on the website out of 10, and considering this is a chess website, any feature that has a paywall will get a -1 on its score. So without further ado, let's get started. I understand that largely the perception of how good gameplay is on one specific platform just comes down to preference. After you play on a specific website for long enough, you're probably going to grow to like the small things about it. So to make sure we have some depth in this category, we're going to go through the playing pool, tournaments, variants, and bots. Let's begin by looking at the playing pool on chess.com. For the most part, it's pretty good. I think that chess.com's use of Glicko 1 makes sense, although I don't have a problem with Glicko 2 either in terms of elo systems. Players don't seem to ever sit at a rating they don't deserve, and chess.com's heightened K factor for players that haven't played on the website for over a month makes sure this never happens. If you've been watching this channel for any amount of time, you'll know how much I hate cheating on chess.com and how big of a problem I think it is. But in my recent experiences, that's only really been occurring in the Rapid pool, and in Blitz, I feel I verse very few cheaters nowadays. There is a pretty big cheating problem in terms of playing daily games on chess.com. However, in my opinion, you should only really be playing daily games against people you know and trust, so I don't think this is a huge issue and it is to be expected. For the standard user, chess.com will bombard you with pretty distracting advertisements whilst you play, which can be really intrusive when you're trying to focus. I'm going to make one exception here and not take away points from chess.com though, because you can just use an ad blocker and fix this problem pretty simply. I do wish that chess.com gave you more matchmaking options though, for example, an option to not pair against new accounts. But considering every competitor also lacks this feature, I'm not going to take off too many points for it. Game review. Game reviews on chess.com are just super weird in my opinion and actually do more harm for the website than I think it does good. First of all, the evaluation bar and progressive line chart are great. I'm not sure how any website could make these features bad, but they work fine on chess.com. The accuracies are also great on chess.com, and I really like that at some point during 2024, they added individualized accuracies for the opening, middle game, and end game. Before this addition, the accuracies could be misleading due to lengthy endgames, which are easier to get high accuracies in because there are just less moves to choose from. However, in the same sentence, chess.com's game ratings are horrendous and disgustingly misleading. The amount of amateur players I hear that actually take these ratings for gospel is absurd, and there is literally no reason for them to exist other than to boost the ego of players unnecessarily. It does just seem like a marketing tactic. If players feel stronger on chess.com because chess.com says they're very strong, they're going to be incentivized to play there more. But even so, I'm taking away points from chess.com here because their yearly revenue isn't the video's concern. On the topic of revenue, the game review is also a paid feature, so we're taking off points here regardless. I'm not a massive fan of chess.com's move notations either, like the great move or missed win notifiers. I think sometimes they can be super misleading and not be good descriptions of the move that was played. However, this isn't a huge issue, and considering chess is a complicated game, you can't expect an algorithm to accurately notate each move, so I'll let them off the hook. The chess.com coach is cool. It gives you a description of the move and how it affected the game. I was absolutely not a fan of when chess.com updated their coach to start speaking to me without a warning though. That was weird. But that's pretty much all there is in the game review. We'll talk about the analysis board in general in a separate section, but if we're just talking about the game review, I don't really like it. Not only is it a paid feature, but I also feel like it's not a great game review function in comparison to its free alternatives anyway. Bots. Chess.com bots are extremely average in my opinion. I know the industry standard isn't anything special, but it would be really cool if chess.com made their bots emulate how real players would play instead of just randomizing the moves. In a lot of cases, I feel like chess.com just use their bots as marketing tactics. However, every time they release a new bot, it just has the same code as the previous bot they released, with a new name and skin. They've done things in the past, like with the Luka Doncic bot, which supposedly increased in skill level the more it played against real players, which I think is super cool, but things like that happen quite rarely. At the end of the day, the amount of bots that chess.com presents shouldn't mean too much. But I am going to be taking away points here because I really think that you shouldn't have to pay for some bots that are just a reskinned engine. Tournaments. The tournaments on chess.com are extremely frustrating to say the least. On their day, they're functional, but that's about the best thing that you can say about them. One thing that I will say is that chess.com shows great generosity when it comes to providing prizes for creators that want to host tournaments. I've given out thousands of dollars worth of chess.com memberships provided by chess.com in my arenas on Twitch, so there is a silver lining. However, if we're strictly speaking about the functionality of these tournaments, they leave a lot to be desired. First of all, when you play a tournament on chess.com and someone else is cheating in the tournament, the owner of the tournament cannot kick them out. You can ban them from the club, but that ban only comes into effect once the current tournament has concluded. This is not the industry standard, and every other website solves this issue. Chess.com also doesn't have many customization options when it comes to creating a tournament. There are no accelerated pairings for bigger rapid tournaments, it supports only a small selection of its variants, tournament durations aren't very customizable, and the list goes on. On top of this, once you've created a tournament, you cannot change any of the custom presets that you chose. If you accidentally made the tournament rated when it should have been unrated, you need to cancel the tournament, kick everyone out, and make a new one. Other platforms like Lichess also show innovation within tournaments like their Berserk feature, which chess.com doesn't have. They do have a streak multiplier, but this is fairly standard within the online chess space and isn't really anything special. Overall, I don't think that chess.com's tournaments are bad, I just think they're extremely average. Variants. The only use that I really see for any of the variants on chess.com is when you want to play one specifically against a friend. Of course, there are some extremely valid variants like Duck Chess, Fog of War, and Bughouse, but there are just never enough people in the playing hall for some of these variants to ever be playable. I don't really have much bad to say about the variants though. The UI is absolutely hideous, but I suppose you can't really complain when next to no other websites will provide these variants with any decent player base. You don't need a membership to play these variants, however the variants itself hold very little value as the average chess player will probably never touch them. With that, we've looked at everything to do with chess.com's gameplay, and I'm not mad with anything they have to offer so far. There aren't too many paywalls, and the things that there are paywalls for are pretty irrelevant in my opinion. I will take off some points for chess.com's bots being behind a paywall, which I just think is a little bit weird, and will also take off some points for their game review being a paid feature as well. In saying all of this, I'm giving chess.com a 6 out of 10 when it comes to their gameplay. I don't think that chess.com's gameplay is straight up bad, but it's not great either. I think there are massive areas of improvement that they can easily do to their website, especially with their tournaments. They'll never score a 10 out of 10 with the paid features that they do have, but they can definitely get up to an 8 out of 10 if they address the issues that I've outlined in this section. Now, let's move on to puzzles. I used to think that chess.com's puzzles were actually quite good, but that was until I really looked at Lichess's puzzles, and in comparison, they're really bad. I think for the average beginner, chess.com's puzzles are probably fine, but for anyone that is trying to become a serious chess player, you're missing out on a lot if you're still using chess.com. First of all, once you pass the 2000 ELO mark on puzzles, the pool of puzzles you'll be presented with is incredibly small already. If you want to use chess.com to study specific thematic tactical positions, you physically cannot because there are only a handful to choose from. Whilst chess.com does have a lot of puzzle themes, the higher rated you become, the less there are, and you will end up getting a bunch of repeated puzzles, which isn't really helpful. For reference, this is well below the industry standard. Chess.com puzzles are also not algorithmic. They are manually pulled from real games or manually composed, which is a huge disadvantage. This results in a lot of puzzles just being bad because of human error. Some puzzles have one move that is +3 on evaluation and another move that is +1, and chess.com will not let you pass the puzzle unless you find the one that is +3. This is a rarity, and it happens in maybe 1 in every 100 games, but if you're sitting at a puzzle trying to figure out what the answer is and you see 2 working options, the likelihood is you're going to sit and figure out why one of them is wrong and why one of them is right. Sometimes chess.com puzzles will also result in a draw as well, which is extremely misleading. Again, around 1 in every 100 puzzles leads to a draw, and if they're that infrequent, the likelihood is you're going to be looking for a win and not a draw. We naturally solve puzzles under the impression that there is a win on the board, so when the solution is a draw, it's very confusing. Chess.com also has a very limited way of choosing puzzle themes. You can go to custom puzzles and individually select themes, but you can't sort by what opening it derives from, the game phase, or really anything aside from what tactical motif it contains. which in my opinion kind of spoils the puzzle anyway. Chess.com's puzzles are also paid. You can play a few puzzles without a membership, but when you get to a certain point, you do need to upgrade. Regardless of this, the puzzle selection is still bad, and something like Lichess completely trumps it, and in my opinion, Lichess is the benchmark for puzzles on the internet, and I would rate them a 10 out of 10. Puzzle Rush and Puzzle Battle are pretty cool features on chess.com, and I actually rate them a lot higher than the overall puzzle selection because you're playing them for different reasons. The first negative I'll cover is on Puzzle Rush Survival, which is basically Puzzle Rush without a clock. This could be a really cool feature. However, once you reach puzzle 65, you reach the difficulty limit, and any puzzle beyond that point will range from 3,500 to 4,000 ELO. We've mentioned before how limited the puzzles are at higher difficulties, so when you reach this point, you get the same puzzles every time. I understand this is a problem that not many people will have though, so I won't let it weigh too much. The other Puzzle Rush time controls are super cool though, and I don't see anything wrong with them whatsoever. Puzzle Battle is also super cool, although sometimes it's difficult to play because not too many people play it, and sometimes you get paired up against someone that has a rating that doesn't reflect their actual skill level. But I'm not sure there's much chess.com can do about it, and apart from that, the game mode is pretty much perfect. We've essentially gone over everything there is to know about puzzles on chess.com, and although Puzzle Rush and Puzzle Battle are essentially perfect in my opinion, their puzzle selection lets them down massively. Maybe I'm being overly harsh on chess.com here, but if you just go to Lichess for a second and see how great their puzzles are, you'll understand why I'm rating chess.com's puzzles so low here. I'm giving chess.com's puzzles a 4 out of 10. This is also including the fact that you need to pay to use their puzzles. I just don't think the puzzles on this platform are good in any way, shape, or form, and that's really all I have to say about it, so let's move on to the next section. We'll start off the Learn category by looking at chess.com's lessons. Of course, this is a paid feature, but we'll still look at it regardless. I've completed over 400 lessons on chess.com, most of them from when I was a beginner, and I can actually say from experience that they're really good. Chess.com does have a bunch of lessons made by grandmasters that left a lot to be desired, but if we're strictly speaking about the lessons made by the chess.com team covering beginner topics, they're actually just a 10 out of 10 for me. Although it is content that you could find for free elsewhere, I can't really fault it in engagement, efficiency, and educational value. They also have lessons on various different openings at the beginner level, which are quite good too, and overall, I would definitely recommend their lessons to somebody who has the money to pay for a membership, as you can get them all done in a single month. For chess.com's sake, I'm going to completely ignore any of the chessable content that kind of creeps into the website. I am quite possibly the biggest chessable hater known to man, and if you want to know why, just Google chessable creator revenue split and you will understand why all of the courses you want to buy are $200. Now, we'll finally get to chess.com's analysis board, which for the most part is actually just pretty good. It also doesn't have a paywall, so anyone can use it no matter what. One thing I will note is how annoying the pop-up banner warning you to not use chess.com's engine whilst playing games is. I know this technically is a bit irrelevant, but not only is it annoying, but it's also incredibly lazy. Putting up a big banner on the screen saying "don't cheat please" isn't going to stop people from cheating. If chess.com doesn't have the technological advancement to tell if somebody was using a chess.com analysis board during their games to cheat in the games, then that's extremely worrying. Anyway, back to the point, chess.com's analysis board is pretty good. Chess.com recently changed a feature that disallows illegal positions in their analysis board, which is annoying. It was pretty fun to create custom FENs with numerous kings on the board to play with your friends, but you can't do that anymore. The setup position feature is flawless other than this though. It would be nicer if there were more straightforward options to edit the player names, profile pictures, and titles, but this is a feature only a creator would use anyway, so I won't let it contribute to the overall score. Chess.com allowing you to load from game history is a cool feature that I really like, and its compatibility with importing Lichess studies is also super useful as well. Once you're actually analyzing, chess.com has a decent amount of customization in terms of which engine you want to use and the depth and lines it calculates at. Again, for the average person, this won't matter too much, but for advanced players creating an opening repertoire using chess.com's analysis board, it's certainly useful. Chess.com also provides an explorer tool, which is really nice. It shows what moves are commonly played in certain positions by masters chapters in your own games and other chess.com players' games. This is an extremely useful tool for analyzing games, especially when you want to review your classical games from over-the-board play. Chess.com also has a show threats feature, which is useful for beginners, and also a suggestion arrow, which I can see being used as well. The analysis board is just very solid in general, and although it's a hard feature to get wrong, chess.com has certainly got it right. Classroom. Okay, enough praising chess.com for their analysis board because their classroom feature is absolutely terrible. I'm not going to try and be nice in this section because this is easily chess.com's worst feature and the industry standard completely blows it out of the water. I will mention that chess.com's classroom feature doesn't have a paywall, so there will be no negative points for that. The analysis board incorporation to the classroom is absolutely fine and I have no issues with that. However, there is an absurd amount of glitches within the classroom that makes it unusable. When you create a new chapter in the classroom, chess.com has a habit of just wiping all of the contents of that chapter and leaving you with the board on its starting position. No idea why this happens, but it does from time to time. Chapters can often have the board's orientation flipped to show the perspective of the white side, even if you set it to show from the black side also, which is mildly frustrating. When another user is added to the classroom, there are plenty more glitches though. Chess.com won't physically let you move a piece if both players are holding it at the same time. Sometimes it doesn't matter who's holding it either, it just won't let you move pieces unless you try several times. The arrows usually work fine, but clearing them can sometimes be an issue too. Worst of all with chess.com's classroom is that you can't save it. On Lichess, you can save a study to come back to literally at any time. On chess.com, once you close the classroom, it's lost forever. There is just nothing positive to say about chess.com's classroom feature. It's an absolute necessity in terms of studying and coaching, and chess.com's option just isn't viable whatsoever. Chess.com's insights are quite cool, and I don't really have anything bad to say about it, so we'll keep this extremely short. There is a paywall for it, so immediately negative points there, but it shows you mostly everything you need to know about your chess. If you're a real statistics buff, it's not even close to the best in the industry at tracking statistics. It doesn't put things into graphs or track a lot of niche statistics that might be useful, but most of the useful things are there for you to see. I think it's a fine, functional feature on chess.com, so we'll just keep moving on. Endgames and Practice. Anyone who's been watching my channel for any amount of time knows how big of a fan I am of chess.com's Endgame Trainer. Although it is a paid feature, which we'll take into account, it is extremely useful for any beginner or amateur player wanting to work on rounding out their endgame skills. It's an extremely simple concept. You can sort through which pieces you want on the board, and chess.com will give you a variety of endgame positions to practice with those parameters. It lets you choose the difficulty of the engine you'll verse, and you can practice virtually all of the important non-theoretical endgame positions there are. Maybe you could argue because the concept is so simple, it's not a great feature, but I would argue the feature doesn't need to be complicated because it works so well. I actually think this is something that chess.com trumps Lichess in as well. The endgame trainers on Lichess is in study form, and you can't really repeat the same practice twice because the moves would be the same. But because chess.com's version pairs you with an engine, the moves will be different every time, and the engine will often employ various defenses for you to break down. Again, like Insights, this is also a very simple feature, so we won't talk about it too much, and it's behind a paywall, so we'll take off some points for that as well. But the feature is really good in my opinion. Practice is very similar to chess.com's endgame trainer, and essentially trains everything that isn't endgames. It too is behind a paywall, but the content within is extremely vast and covers virtually everything. There are attacking drills, defending drills, opening practice, and you can even set up custom positions to play against an engine over and over. Whilst it is a very simple concept, there is no need for it to be more complicated than it already is, and I think it's a great feature nonetheless. That's about it for the Learn section on chess.com, and I think this is easily where they're going to be scoring the highest. Whilst the majority of this content is behind a paywall and the classroom feature is absolutely unusable, I'm still happy to give them a 7 out of 10 here. Their overall score could easily rise to a 10 out of 10 if the classroom feature actually worked and a lot of this content wasn't paid. However, the content being unpaid is extremely unlikely, so I think the best they could ever really do here is an 8 out of 10. User interface. We won't break down the user interface into separate sections because it's kind of this overarching feature that is everywhere on chess.com. I should note that I'm also not a professional in UI or UX in any way, but this is just my opinion after playing on the platform for so long. As far as layout goes, the UI on chess.com is fantastic. Nothing takes up more space than it should, and all of the most important buttons and features can be easily accessed at any time. The color scheme on chess.com also makes a lot of sense. You can customize the UI a little bit in terms of color, but not a whole lot. Luckily, if you really want to, because chess.com is a website, there are plenty of extensions you can get to change how things look if you have a preference. Some things on chess.com are admittedly a little difficult to find and difficult to navigate. Chess.com has a habit of updating the UI when literally nobody asked for it, so sometimes it can be a little difficult finding where they put things. Chess.com also has what I like to describe as spaghetti code. To me, it seems like chess.com cycles through developers quite often, and the new developer has to work with what the old developer coded. It's essentially just like developer Chinese whispers, and eventually things start to break. This means on occasions, sometimes buttons don't work or things just aren't displayed correctly. This isn't a huge issue, but it's worth noting at least. Overall, I understand that UI really comes down to taste. People are going to like different things, and more importantly, the more you play on a certain platform, the more you're going to like its UI. So this rating won't weigh in too heavily. In saying that though, I'll give chess.com an 8 out of 10 on its UI. It's functional, it looks good, and because it's a website, you can kind of customize it to your liking in any way you please. Chess.com does have a bunch of features that we've kind of brushed past in this video, but most of them are things that people won't use on a day-to-day basis, so I don't think they would weigh in too heavily to the overall rating. However, we've covered most of the things on the website, so let's do a quick rundown to remind ourselves of what we thought. The gameplay on chess.com is pretty standard. There's a lot of things they can improve upon, especially tournaments and their cheating problem. And although I rated it a 6 out of 10, it's certainly playable. Their puzzles left a lot to be desired though. It seems they don't want to change the core functionality of their puzzle system, which really hurt their rating of 4 out of 10. Not to mention, the puzzles are also a paid feature. The learn feature is fantastic, and I really have nothing bad to say about it except for their abysmal classroom feature. A 7 out of 10 seems like a very fair rating, even though it is a paid feature. The user interface is also very good. You can tell chess.com puts a lot of focus into their user interface, especially by how often they keep updating it to make it feel fresh. Again, this won't weigh into the rating too much, but an 8 out of 10 here seems fair. Overall though, looking at chess.com as a website and taking into account that there are a lot of paid features here which will take off points, I'm going to give them a 6 out of 10. If we're going to ignore that there are paid features, it easily rises to a 7 out of 10. But considering there are competitors that offer free alternatives to everything that they offer, I really can't see how we can give them anything higher than a 7 out of 10 right now. If you're wondering why my rating in this video is a lot lower than it was in my last, it's because between then and now, I've looked at a lot of different websites and had my eyes opened by what the industry standard really is. If you have any recommendations for the people watching this video of free chess resources or websites that you would like to share, feel free to comment it below and I'll pin the best ones so everyone can see them. But apart from that, I hope you all enjoyed today's video and I will see you all in the next one.